There is a particular kind of cruelty that requires almost nothing. It requires no raised voice, no visible anger, no dramatic action. It requires only the decision to not give something that someone desperately needs. I learned this on a night when I was so tired I could barely stand, when my entire body was screaming for rest, and my husband decided that night was the perfect time to withhold everything he normally gave me without thinking. His conversation, his acknowledgement, his presence in any form that mattered. My name is Hannah. I grew up Old Order Amish in Holmes County, Ohio. I married at 19 and left at 27. On this channel, I tell the stories I was taught to keep silent about, the ones that lived behind closed farmhouse doors. Today, I want to talk about withholding and how it functions as punishment in marriages where a husband has been taught that nearly everything is his to control, including what he chooses to give or not give to his wife. I want to start by explaining what I mean by withholding, because it sounds abstract until you have lived inside it. Withholding is not the same as the coldness I have talked about before, though they are related. The coldness is an atmosphere. Withholding is more deliberate than that. It is the active choice not to provide something that someone depends on, not because it is unavailable, but because withdrawing it serves a purpose. It is punishment wrapped in the appearance of neutrality. The night I am thinking of, I had been awake for nearly 36 hours. My youngest daughter had been sick with a high fever, and I had stayed awake through most of 2 nights, checking on her every hour, changing cool cloths on her forehead, sitting beside her cradle listening to her breathing, terrified that something more serious was happening. By the evening of the 3rd day, when her fever finally broke, I was running on fumes. I could not think clearly. My body felt like it was moving through water. I remember standing at the stove making supper and losing track of what I was doing mid-action, standing there with a spoon in my hand, staring at nothing, trying to remember what I was supposed to be doing next. Jonas came home from work around 6. I remember his face when he walked in and saw the kitchen in a state of controlled chaos. Dishes waiting to be washed, laundry in a pile waiting to be folded, the table not yet set. Nothing was wrong, exactly, but everything was slightly less than perfect, and I think that was the moment he decided this night would be the night to teach me something. He did not say anything about it directly. He simply came in, acknowledged the children with his usual warmth, and then, when he looked at me, his expression changed. He did not look angry, he looked disappointed, and then he became, very deliberately, unavailable. I finished making supper while he sat at the table reading the newspaper. I set out the meal. We ate in silence. After we finished, he announced that he was going to the barn to work on a project. He had decided to rebuild part of the fence, he said, and he would be out there until late. He left. I cleaned the dishes, put the children to bed, and waited. He came back around 9. I remember feeling a wave of relief when I heard the barn door close, thinking that perhaps he would come inside, perhaps we would sit together for a few minutes before bed. Perhaps he would offer some small gesture of acknowledgement that I had managed, despite my exhaustion, to keep our household functioning. I was desperate for that acknowledgement. I was so tired that I felt like I was disappearing, and I needed someone to see me, to tell me that what I was doing mattered, that I mattered. But when he came inside, he did not look at me. He went directly upstairs. I followed him a few minutes later, and I remember standing in the doorway of our bedroom, trying to find the words to explain how exhausted I was, how badly I needed his help with something, how I was barely holding on. And he looked at me and said, "I am going to sleep. I have had a long day." Then he turned his back to me and went to bed. I stood there for a moment, and something inside me understood, very clearly, what was happening. He was withholding his presence. He was withholding his conversation. He was withholding the small intimacy of acknowledging that I existed and that my exhaustion might matter. He was withholding what I think of now as the basic human recognition that comes from another person in a marriage saying, "I see that you are struggling. I will help carry some of this." I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed beside him, too tired to sleep, my body shaking with a kind of exhaustion that had moved beyond physical into something almost spiritual. And I understood, in that moment, that withholding is perhaps the most effective punishment available to someone in a position of power in a marriage. It requires nothing. It can be explained away. He was simply tired. He was simply not in the mood to talk. He was simply making a choice about how to spend his evening. And yet the impact on me was total. I felt unseen. I felt unimportant. I felt, in the most literal sense, abandoned. The next morning, he was warm again. He smiled at the children. He was attentive to me in small ways. He made it clear, through his sudden availability, that his withholding the night before had been a choice. a deliberate withdrawal that he could turn on and off at will. And I understood that I had been punished for something, though I was never entirely clear what. For the state of the kitchen? For not having supper ready exactly when he expected it? For being too tired to be the version of myself he preferred? I think about withholding as a control mechanism, and I think about how efficient it is, especially in a marriage where there is already a power imbalance. Because withholding requires the person being withheld from to constantly monitor what they are doing, constantly try to figure out what might provoke the withdrawal, constantly work to earn back whatever it is being withheld. And in doing so, they are teaching themselves that their worth rises and falls based on whether they manage to prevent the withdrawal. I have talked to other women from similar communities, and the things that husbands withhold are remarkably consistent across different marriages. Conversation is one of the most common ones. A husband simply stops talking. He answers questions in single words. He does not share anything about his day. He does not ask about hers. The silence becomes a tool, and the wife spends all her energy trying to figure out what she did to deserve this silence, how she can fix it, what she needs to do differently to earn his words back. Some husbands withhold physical affection, but not in the way you might expect. They do not withhold sex, necessarily. They withhold tenderness. They withhold touch that is not sexual. They withhold the simple act of holding a hand, of embracing a wife who is struggling, of offering comfort in the way another human might offer it to someone they care about. And a wife in that situation becomes starved for this kind of touch, which is different from sexual intimacy, but no less important for human survival. I know of women whose husbands withhold food, not in a way that would be obvious from outside, not in a way that would constitute visible abuse, but in small ways. Eating the best portions themselves, not helping when their wife is preparing meals, not expressing appreciation for what has been prepared, making it clear, through subtle actions, that her effort at feeding the family does not matter to him, does not warrant acknowledgment. Some husbands withhold attention from the children as punishment for the wife. If a wife does something that displeases her husband, suddenly he is less present with the children, less warm toward them. And the wife, watching this, understands that her punishment is being extended to her children, that her failure to please her husband has consequences for how her children are treated. It is an incredibly effective form of control, because now the wife is motivated not just by her own need for her husband's presence, but by her children's need for his. I think about what I understand now about withholding that I did not understand when I was living inside it. I understand that withholding is not a passive thing. It is not something that simply happens. It is an active choice that requires a person to decide, consciously or unconsciously, that withdrawing something they know someone needs is an acceptable way to express displeasure or maintain control. And I understand that withholding works, in terms of its goal, which is to make the person being withheld from constantly anxious, constantly monitoring their own behavior, constantly trying to figure out how to earn back what is being withheld. There is research on this. It is called deprivation as a control mechanism, and it is one of the most common tactics used in situations of coercive control. Withholding is deprivation. It is the deliberate removal of something someone needs, and it teaches the person being deprived that their needs are not important, that their worth is determined by whether they can successfully avoid triggering the withdrawal, that they exist in a constant state of conditional acceptance. By my 6th year of marriage, I had become an expert at managing the withholding. I had learned what kinds of things might provoke it. I had learned to work harder, to be more attentive, to anticipate his needs before he expressed them, all in an effort to prevent the withdrawal. And in learning these things, I had also learned something that took me years to fully understand. I had learned that I did not have the right to be tired. I had learned that my exhaustion did not matter if it interfered with his comfort. I had learned that my needs were inherently less important than his whims. When I finally left, one of the things I grieved most was not anything dramatic. It was not recovering from a specific trauma. It was recovering from years of deprivation, from the constant message that I did not deserve to have my needs met unless I had somehow earned that right. I spent a long time in therapy, learning to ask for things without feeling like I was being unreasonable. I spent a long time learning that exhaustion was a valid reason to need help, that it was not something I had to hide or minimize in order to make someone else comfortable. One of the things my therapist told me was that withholding is particularly effective as a control mechanism because it is so quiet. It does not leave bruises, there are no witnesses, it can be explained away. And yet, the person being withheld from knows, with absolute clarity, that it is happening, that it is intentional, and that the only way to make it stop is to change themselves. I think about all the women I knew who were living with this kind of withholding, who were learning, year after year, that their needs did not matter, that their exhaustion did not warrant help, that their value was determined by whether they could successfully avoid triggering their husband's withdrawal. I think about how efficient this system is, how it requires almost no effort on the part of the husband, how it teaches the wife to blame herself for the very deprivation that is being inflicted on her. If you have ever felt unseen in the relationship, if you have ever struggled through exhaustion while the person who could have helped you chose not to, if you have ever felt like your needs had to be earned through perfect behavior, I see you. You are not being selfish for needing rest. You are not being unreasonable for wanting acknowledgement. You are living inside a system where your needs had been deemed less important than someone else's comfort, and that system was not your fault. This is my story. If it stayed with you, tell me in the comments, and subscribe if you want to keep hearing the truth from behind the prayer cap.